After 55 years on stage together, a period almost unimaginable in the music world, fate struck one final blow against the brothers. At almost the same time, both were diagnosed with cancer. One won the battle for life, the other did not. The strongest brotherhood in the history of bluegrass, a bond forged through poverty and tempered on stage, was finally broken, not by discord or fame, but by death. Those two men were Jim and Jesse McReynolds, unsung legends of bluegrass. They were not rebels or fallen angels. They were gentlemen who built a legacy out of necessity, but through tireless dedication to music, family, and each other. This is the story of their enduring flame, where it began, how it has burned brightly for more than half a century through life's ups and downs, and how in the end, one brother faced the painful pain of having to continue singing alone. To truly understand the soulful, authentic music of Jim and Jesse McReynolds, you must first travel back in time and place to the world that forged them. It was a world apart from the rest of America, the rugged, beautiful, and unforgiving landscape of the Clinch Mountains in southwestern Virginia. They were born in a small, unincorporated community called Carfax, a collection of humble homes nestled in a hollow near the coal town of Coburn. This was the heart of Appalachia in the late 1920s. Jim arrived first on February 13, 1927, and his younger brother Jesse followed on July 9, 1929, just as the Great Depression was beginning to tighten its cruel grip on an already impoverished nation. Life here was governed by a different clock. The rhythms were dictated not by Wall Street tickers, but by the changing of the seasons, the Sunday morning call of the church bell, and the deep, dark veins of coal that ran like a black river beneath the mountains. Their father, Joseph McReynolds, was a man of the earth, a farmer who coaxed a living from the rocky soil. But like most men in the region, his fate was also tied to the mines. The coal company was the ultimate power, the provider of both sustenance and death. The work was a daily gamble, a descent into darkness, where the threat of a cave-in, an explosion, or the slow, suffocating grip of black lung disease was a constant companion. It was a life of back-breaking labor and perpetual uncertainty, a world where a man's hands were calloused and his future was never guaranteed. But the McReynolds' home, though poor in material wealth, was immeasurably rich in something else: music. It was their true inheritance, a living tradition passed down through generations. Music in Appalachia wasn't a commodity or a form of high art. It was the social fabric, the emotional currency of everyday life. It was the sound of a fiddle at a Saturday night barn dance, the soaring gospel harmonies in a small wooden church on a Sunday morning. It was the way stories were told, courtships were conducted, and sorrows were shared. And the McReynolds family was steeped in this tradition. Their grandfather, Charles McReynolds, was a celebrated local fiddler, a man whose musical prowess was known throughout the surrounding hollows. He led a popular and colorfully named string band called the Bull Mountain Moonshiners, a name that hinted at another proud and often necessary Appalachian tradition. And here lies the first little-known secret of the McReynolds family legacy, a detail that places them at the very epicenter of American music history. In the summer of 1927, a talent scout from the Victor Talking Machine Company named Ralph Peer traveled to the nearby town of Bristol, right on the Tennessee-Virginia border. He set up a temporary recording studio in a hat warehouse, putting out a call for local musicians. He was hunting for the authentic, raw sounds of the mountains, the hillbilly music that he believed could be a commercial success. What happened over those next 2 weeks would change the course of popular music forever. These were the legendary Bristol Sessions, an event often called the big bang of country music. It was here that the two foundational acts of the genre, the Carter family and Jimmie Rodgers, were discovered and recorded for the first time. And among the musicians who made the journey to Bristol to play for Ralph Peer's recording machine was a fiddle player named Charles McReynolds and his Bull Mountain Moonshiners. The music of Jim and Jesse's own grandfather was captured on those historic primitive recordings. This incredible fact means that the brothers were not just participants in the story of country music. Its DNA, its very birth certificate, was in their blood from the very beginning. Music was the heartbeat of their community, but the shadow of the coal mine was a constant looming presence. This ever-present danger became a brutal reality for the McReynolds family when their father, Joseph, was nearly killed in a mining accident. He survived, but the incident left a permanent scar on the family, a visceral reminder of the price that the mountain so often extracted from its men. The experience had a profound effect on his eldest son. As a teenager, Jim briefly followed his father's path, taking a job in the mines to help support the family. But the claustrophobic darkness, the choking dust, and the chilling memory of his father's accident were too much to bear. He made a life-altering decision, a quiet vow to himself. He would not share his father's fate. He would not be swallowed by the mountain. He would escape the mines, and his music would be the light that guided him out. This quiet personal family tragedy became the unspoken driving force behind the brothers' shared ambition. For Jim and Jesse McReynolds, becoming professional musicians wasn't just a dream of fame and fortune. It was a desperate, determined act of survival. In the quiet of their humble home, with no money for formal lessons, the two boys began their true education. Their tutors were the faint crackling sounds coming from the family's battery-powered radio. Late at night, they would huddle close, listening in awe to the live broadcasts of the Grand Ole Opry from WSM in Nashville, absorbing the sounds of their heroes like Roy Acuff and Bill Monroe. Jim, with his steady hand and quiet, watchful demeanor, was naturally drawn to the solid rhythm of the guitar. Jesse, more introverted and intensely creative, fell in love with the high, sweet sound of the mandolin. It was in this isolation, far from the established schools of music, that Jesse began to develop a revolutionary and entirely unique style of playing. He was mesmerized by the rolling, three-finger banjo style of the great Earl Scruggs, a sound that was then taking the country music world by storm. Jesse wanted to replicate that cascading waterfall-like sound on his own instrument. Through countless hours of solitary practice, he invented a technique that would come to be known as cross-picking. It was a fluid, intricate, and technically dazzling method that allowed him to play a continuous stream of notes across three strings, mimicking the banjo's roll. It was a style born of pure necessity and raw genius, a sound created in the quiet woods of Virginia that would eventually make him a legend among mandolin players worldwide. Their vocal harmony was as natural as breathing, a perfect, intuitive blend that only siblings can achieve. Jim's clear, high tenor, pure and effortless, soared above Jesse's warmer, more grounded lead vocal. They began performing at local community events and talent contests in the mid-1940s, and their preternatural talent was immediately apparent to everyone who heard them. After Jim returned from his own military service at the end of World War II, the brothers knew they had to make a choice. In 1947, they officially formed their first band, calling themselves the McReynolds Brothers and the Cumberland Mountain Boys. Their escape from the mines had begun. Their early career was a grueling apprenticeship on the American radio circuit, a forgotten network of small-town stations that, in the pre-television era, was the lifeblood of aspiring country and bluegrass acts. They were musical nomads, piling into a car with their instruments and moving from town to town, station to station, playing for little more than pocket money and a place to sleep. They honed their craft on the airwaves of small stations from Norton, Virginia to Waterloo, Iowa to Wichita, Kansas. It was a life of constant motion and financial uncertainty, but it was also an invaluable education. They learned how to connect with an audience, how to build a show, and how to be versatile. They played whatever the station manager or the live audience wanted to hear, from the sacred gospel hymns they had grown up with to the upbeat Western swing tunes that were popular at the time. In 1951, they made their first recordings, a collection of 10 gospel songs for the Small Kentucky Records label. A year later, they got their big break, signing a contract with one of the biggest record companies in the world, Capitol Records. It was Capitol that suggested a catchier name for the group, one that would become their permanent identity, Jim and Jesse and the Virginia Boys. They seemed to be on the cusp of a major breakthrough, but just as their career was beginning to gain real traction, fate intervened. In 1952, at the height of the Korean War, a draft notice arrived at the family home. Jesse McReynolds was being called into the U.S. Army. The duo was broken up at the very moment their star was beginning to rise. Their momentum was brutally halted. For the next 2 years, Jesse served his country, a world away from the stages of home. But he never stopped playing music. Stationed in Korea and later in Japan, he became a part of the Army's entertainment corps. It was here that he formed a band with another young draftee who, like him, was a musician on the brink of stardom, Charlie Louvin, one half of the legendary Louvin brothers. Together in a band they called the Dusty Rhodes Boys, they entertained homesick troops, bringing a small piece of home to the front lines of the Cold War. While this period was a professional setback, it was also a hidden blessing, a time of intense creative growth for Jesse. The long hours of downtime gave him the opportunity to experiment and refine his playing. It was during his service that he perfected another of his signature techniques, a split-string method, where he would use his pick and his fingers simultaneously to play 2 separate harmony lines at once on his mandolin, creating the illusion of 2 instruments playing at the same time. When Jesse finally returned home in 1954, the brothers were reunited. Jim had kept the band going in his absence, but the magic was gone without his brother's voice and instrument. Now they were back together, their sound richer, more sophisticated, and more unique than ever before. Armed with their Capitol Records contract and a new arsenal of innovative techniques, they were ready to take on the world. The long, hard road from the mountains of Virginia had finally led them to the doorstep of Nashville. With Jesse's return, the Virginia Boys were whole again, their brotherly harmony now richer and more seasoned by their time apart. They set their sights on Nashville, but the world they were entering was in the midst of a seismic shift. As the quiet hills of Bluegrass were being shaken by the rebellious energy of rockabilly, Jim and Jesse would first have to navigate a few surprising detours on their path to the top, including a stop at the most legendary recording studio in America. Before they would become synonymous with the Nashville sound and the Grand Ole Opry, Jim and Jesse made a fascinating and little-known stop at another ground zero of American music, Sun Records in Memphis. In 1955, they found themselves in the same small, unassuming studio where Elvis Presley, Johnny Cash, and Jerry Lee Lewis were in the process of inventing rock and roll. For a brief, tantalizing moment, the traditional Appalachian harmonies of the McReynolds brothers shared the same air as the raw, primal energy of the rockabilly revolution. They recorded a handful of tracks for the legendary Sam Phillips, including a stunning version of I'll Go Stepping Too. Ultimately, the partnership was not to be. Their polished, intricate bluegrass sound, with its soaring harmonies and complex instrumentation, was a world away from the raw, stripped down, and often frantic style that Phillips was looking for. Their music was beautiful, but it wasn't dangerous. The session stands as a fascinating footnote, another moment where the brothers found themselves at a crucial crossroads of music history, a testament to the quality of their talent that they were even in that hallowed room. But their destiny lay not in the rebellious swagger of Memphis, but in the traditional heart of Nashville. After their time at Capitol and a brief stint with Columbia Records, the brothers found their true recording home in 1960 when they signed with Epic Records. This partnership would last for nearly a decade and produce their most iconic and beloved body of work. It was here that they perfected their signature sound, a sound that was both deeply rooted in the traditions of the mountains and yet polished and sophisticated enough for a national audience. Their harmony was the bedrock. Jim's high, clear tenor was one of the purest in the genre, a flawless, soaring instrument that could convey both joy and heartbreak with equal power. It intertwined perfectly with Jesse's warmer, more grounded lead vocal, creating a sound that was instantly recognizable. But their secret weapon was Jesse's mandolin. By now, his cross-picking style was a thing of legend among fellow musicians. It was a sound that no one else could replicate, a constant shimmering waterfall of notes that was both technically breathtaking and deeply soulful. His playing elevated their music from standard bluegrass to something entirely new, a sound that was both traditional and progressive. They released a string of classic singles, from the upbeat romance of Sweet Flossie Farmer to the gospel-infused heartache of The Flame of Love. While their music was gaining national attention, they were also carefully cultivating a unique and powerful image. In a genre that was often marketed with a rustic, hillbilly aesthetic of overalls and straw hats, Jim and Jesse presented themselves as the consummate professionals, the gentlemen of bluegrass. They were always impeccably dressed on stage in sharp matching suits. Their shoes shined, their hair perfectly in place. Their onstage demeanor was one of quiet dignity and respect for the audience and the music. Jim, in particular, embodied this persona. He was the stoic, serious anchor of the duo, his calm presence a perfect foil for the dazzling virtuosity of his younger brother. This wasn't just a marketing gimmick. It was an authentic reflection of their character and a savvy business move. Their sophisticated image allowed them to appeal to a wider audience, including the urban folk revival crowds who were discovering bluegrass for the first time. They were ambassadors for the genre, proving that the music of the mountains could also be the music of the concert hall. The long and winding road of their career, from the radio shacks of Virginia to the recording studios of Memphis, was always leading to one destination. For any artist in country music, all roads lead to the Grand Ole Opry. In the mid-20th century, the Opry was more than just a stage. It was the mother church of country music, a live radio show broadcast every Saturday night from the Ryman Auditorium in Nashville that was a national institution. To become a member of the Opry was to be officially inducted into country music royalty. It was a guarantee of a permanent home, a lifelong honor that signified you had truly arrived. It was the dream that Jim and Jesse had shared as little boys, huddled around their battery-powered radio in that small house in the shadow of the Clinch Mountains. On March 2nd, 1964, that dream came true. Jim and Jesse and the Virginia Boys were officially invited to become members of the Grand Ole Opry. One can only imagine what it felt like for the two brothers to step into that famous unbroken circle of wood on the Ryman stage for the first time, not as guests, but as members of the family. It was the ultimate validation. the culmination of nearly 2 decades of hard work, perseverance, and unwavering brotherly devotion. They had escaped the mines and they had reached the promised land. For the next 38 years, they would be mainstays of the Opry, beloved ambassadors for bluegrass on its most sacred stage, their harmony a constant, reassuring presence on the Saturday night airwaves. Unlike many of the bluegrass purists of their generation, Jim and Jesse were never afraid to innovate and push the boundaries of the genre. Their roots were traditional, but their minds were open. In the late 1960s and early 70s, as the lines between genres began to blur, they embraced the spirit of the times, becoming unlikely pioneers of a more progressive bluegrass sound. They were among the first major bluegrass acts to regularly incorporate electric bass and even a full set of drums into their band, moves that were considered near heresy by the staunch traditionalists. Their musical curiosity was boundless, and it led them down some fascinating and unexpected paths. They recorded entire tribute albums to their musical heroes, and their choices were often surprising. They beautifully translated the Western swing of Bob Wills and his Texas Playboys into their bluegrass style, but they didn't stop there. In a move that shocked many, they released an album of Chuck Berry songs, brilliantly reimagining rock and roll anthems like Maybelline and Johnny B. Good with the banjo, fiddle, and Jesse's lightning-fast mandolin. They proved that a good song was a good song, regardless of genre. Jesse's reputation as a musician's musician grew, his talent respected far beyond the world of bluegrass. In 1969, he received a phone call that led to one of the most surreal and wonderful crossovers in music history. The legendary psychedelic rock band The Doors were in the studio recording their album The Soft Parade, and they wanted a mandolin player. Their producer, Paul Rothchild, who was a fan of Jim and Jesse, recommended Jesse. The quiet man from Virginia soon found himself in a Los Angeles studio with Jim Morrison, one of the most iconic and volatile frontmen in rock and roll. The result was Jesse's beautiful, lilting mandolin solo on the track Wishful Sinful, a moment of pure Appalachian soul in the heart of a psychedelic rock classic. While they were experimenting, they also scored their biggest mainstream hit. In 1967, their recording of the rollicking truck driving anthem, Diesel on My Tail, climbed to number 18 on the Billboard country charts, its infectious energy making it a staple of jukeboxes and truck stops across America. The secret to their incredible longevity, their ability to weather 55 years in a notoriously brutal business, was not just their musical talent. It was their remarkable private lives, which were as stable and harmonious as their music. In an almost unbelievable twist that speaks to their deep bond, the two brothers married two sisters, Joy and Arata. For decades, the two families lived next door to each other on a sprawling property they called the Double J Ranch in Gallatin, Tennessee, just outside of Nashville. Their lives were a picture of domestic tranquility, completely devoid of the scandals of divorce, addiction, and excess that plagued so many of their peers. They operated as a perfect partnership offstage as well. Jim, the quiet, dignified elder brother, was also the savvy businessman of the duo. He handled the bookings, the finances, and the contracts with a steady, cautious hand, ensuring they would never again face the kind of poverty they had known in their youth. This freed Jesse to be the creative force, the innovator, who was constantly exploring new musical horizons. This perfect division of labor was the engine that kept the band running smoothly for more than half a century, avoiding the ego clashes and financial pitfalls that had destroyed countless other groups. They were, in the truest sense of the word, gentlemen. Their reputation in Nashville was impeccable. They were known as genuinely good men, devoted to their families, their faith, and their music. Their story is remarkable for its profound lack of drama, which in the often chaotic world of show business is perhaps the most remarkable thing of all. As the decades passed, their status as living legends was cemented. In 1993, their immense contributions to the music they loved were officially recognized when they were inducted into the International Bluegrass Music Hall of Fame. In 1997, they received one of the nation's highest artistic honors, the National Heritage Fellowship from the National Endowment for the Arts, an award that recognized them as masters of a uniquely American art form. By the dawn of the new millennium, they were elder statesmen, a beloved institution, the living embodiment of the enduring power of bluegrass music and brotherly love. Their harmony seemed eternal, their bond unbreakable, a quiet fire that had burned steadily for a lifetime. But that fire, which had weathered every storm, was about to face its final, inevitable, and most painful challenge. For a lifetime, their harmonies had been inseparable. Their lives lived in a near-perfect parallel. It seemed that nothing could break the bond between them, but that final, painful challenge would arrive not in the form of a professional dispute or a personal falling out, but as a cruel and random twist of biological fate. In a tragic coincidence that seems almost biblical in its symmetry, the two brothers who had shared everything were about to share their greatest battle. In 2002, the unthinkable happened. In a tragic coincidence that seems almost too cruel to be real, both Jim and Jesse were diagnosed with different unrelated forms of cancer at almost the exact same time. After a lifetime lived in near-perfect parallel, from sharing a childhood bedroom to marrying sisters and living side by side, even their final, most personal battles arrived as a shared experience. True to their Appalachian roots and the stoic, uncomplaining nature of their generation, they initially kept the devastating news a secret from the public and even from many of their close friends. The show, as it always had for 55 years, had to go on. They continued to tour and fulfill their regular duties at the Grand Ole Opry, all while undergoing grueling treatments. One can only imagine the immense physical and emotional toll it must have taken to stand in the bright, warm spotlights of the Opry, singing songs of love, loss, and faith, while privately grappling with their own mortality. It was the ultimate performance of their gentlemen of bluegrass persona, a final powerful act of professionalism and quiet courage. But this was one battle they could not fight with the same outcome. Their parallel paths, which had run alongside each other for over 70 years, were finally forced to diverge. Jesse, a fighter his whole life, responded well to treatment. He beat the disease and went into a hard-won remission. But Jim's cancer was relentless and unforgiving. The elder brother, the steady, quiet anchor of the duo, was losing his fight. In his final months, the Nashville music community, now aware of his illness, rallied around him. A tribute concert was held at the Ryman Auditorium, the Mother Church of Country Music, where a constellation of country and bluegrass stars gathered to honor him and sing the songs he had made famous. It was a beautiful, heartbreaking farewell. On New Year's Eve 2002, with his family by his side, James Monroe McReynolds passed away at the age of 75. The longest-running brother duo in the history of bluegrass music was over. The harmony, which had echoed from the mountains of Virginia to the most famous stages in the world for 55 years, was finally broken. The loss was profound, not just for the McReynolds family, but for the entire world of country music. It was the end of an era, the silencing of a voice that had been a part of the American soundtrack for more than half a century. For the first time in his adult life, Jesse McReynolds was alone on stage. The grief was a heavy, constant companion. "It's like losing a part of yourself," he would later say, in his typically understated manner. The man who had stood to his right night after night for 5.5 decades was gone. But Jesse refused to let the music die. He knew that the greatest tribute he could pay his brother was to carry on their shared legacy. He returned to the stage of the Grand Ole Opry, his heart heavy to continue their work. He became the beloved patriarch of the Opry, a living, breathing piece of history. As the years went on, he eventually became its oldest performing member, his presence a comforting link to the genre's golden age. To see Jesse McReynolds in his later years was to witness an act of profound resilience. He would step into that famous circle of wood on the Ryman stage, his body stooped with age, but his spirit undimmed, and the moment his fingers touched the strings of his mandolin, the years would melt away. His creative fire remained miraculously unextinguished. Far from retreating into the past, Jesse continued to innovate, to explore, and to surprise. In 2010, at the age of 81, he released one of the most unexpected and beautiful albums of his long career, Jesse McReynolds and Friends, a tribute to Jerry Garcia and Robert Hunter. It was a collection of songs by the iconic psychedelic rock band, the Grateful Dead, lovingly reinterpreted with bluegrass instrumentation. To some, the pairing seemed bizarre, but to those who knew, it made perfect sense. Jerry Garcia, the legendary guitarist of the Dead, had been a lifelong and deeply knowledgeable fan of bluegrass music, and he had been particularly in awe of Jesse's cross-picking style. The album was a gorgeous full-circle moment, a conversation between two master musicians from seemingly different worlds, united by a shared love for American folk traditions. It was a testament to Jesse's enduring musical curiosity and his role as a humble bridge between genres. He also found a way to keep the family harmony alive. He brought his gifted grandson, Garrett, into his band to sing Jim's high tenor parts. To see them on stage together was a deeply moving sight. 3 generations of McReynolds men, with young Garrett's pure voice soaring in the same register as his late granduncle's, a beautiful echo of the past and a promise for the future. Jesse was not just preserving a legacy, he was passing it on. This strength was all the more remarkable given the other private sorrows he endured, including the premature death of his own son, Keith, a talented banjo player in his own right. Through it all, Jesse played on. For 2 decades, he carried the torch alone, a lonely but dignified encore to a legendary career. On June 23, 2023, after a period of declining health, Jesse McReynolds passed away peacefully at the age of 93. The story of Jim and Jesse is not a story of tragedy in the traditional sense. There were no dramatic flameouts or public falls from grace. Theirs was a life of quiet dignity, of promises kept, and of a bond that could only be broken by death. Their legacy is a profound and multi-layered one. Musically, it is found in Jesse's revolutionary mandolin techniques, which are now a fundamental part of the bluegrass vocabulary, studied and revered by players around the world. It's heard in their pristine vocal harmonies, which set a benchmark for every duo that followed. And it's felt in their gentle, innovative spirit, which helped guide bluegrass from a rigid, traditionalist form into the more expansive and dynamic genre it is today. But their human legacy is perhaps even more significant. In an industry full of cautionary tales of broken partnerships and shattered families, their 55-year career stands as a monument to brotherhood, loyalty, and mutual respect. They were the gentlemen of Bluegrass, and it was not an act. They lived up to the name, proving that decency and greatness could walk hand in hand. In the end, their story comes full circle, returning to the mountains that made them. They were true sons of Appalachia, men who escaped the literal darkness of the coal mines to bring a lifetime of musical light to the world.